This afternoon, we're going to have a farmer panel. And before we move into the farmer panel, just some things that I'd kind of like to set the stage with a little bit. And we will do that next.
The cable came out. They slide the cable in. There, you're back.
Thank you. You're a handy guy, Paul. Okay. As you can tell from this morning's presentation, Paul's got a lot of experience. And different times I've seen that same drive wheel wanting to ride up, on the soil surface. And Paul puts it into a simple format on the math on it. Number of openers times this pressure and versus the weight of the machine. And it makes sense. And so a lot of that's put into context. Tomorrow, Paul's going to be with us also at the Minokan farm. And we got a used planter, John Deere planter, that has a few acres on it, and backed it into the Minokan farm storage building yesterday. And so tomorrow, Paul will be at the Minokan farm at 10 o'clock. And this is a time where we'll actually have a planter sitting right in front of him. And we can go into a little bit more detail with the folks that would like to do that. And so anyone's welcome, 10 o'clock. Whoever shows up, we take a head count and call in for pizza. So it's a pretty easy noon meal and pretty relaxed atmosphere, I hope. As a lot of you know, I'm at that stage where if it isn't fun, I don't do it. So we'll go with that kind of attitude. But I think this is a time where we can take a look at those specific items that Paul went through and discussed. And so we appreciate that. And again, a little shout out for Web Soil Survey. If you get a chance, go in the back of the room sometime. Web Soil Survey, if you have a legal description in the United States, it's in that system. And you can access that online at any time, and Perry can give you some starting tips on it. And it gives you a wealth of information. So it's really a good product. I think I've often said one of the best products I think that I've ever seen come out of NRCS. It is really a top-notch product. So if you have that opportunity, don't hesitate to do that. I also want to give a shout out to NRCS employees, county agents, etc., that came today. I think this is kind of how we learn. We build this as basically building the soil health foundation. And I think we need to go ahead and look at that in its context. We have to have the principles at the bottom of a system that make it work. And I placed those 5 principles just on a chart, and we'll just walk through them, and then we'll kind of, as we set the stage for our farmer panel. So if we take a look, the first one I've got listed is armor. It's just what it is. That's the protection of the soil. And so it comes in various forms. It can be dead litter. It can be green material, but it takes the energy out of the raindrop. It really helps us with transpiration instead of evaporation. And so we start to build one of our first principles with armor. And then how do we minimize soil disturbance? There's tons of data that tells us that when we have soil disturbance, we have CO2 leaving as the respiration and as our residue decays. This CO2 goes back to the atmosphere. And so how do we minimize that? How do we reduce that? How do we ratchet that down a little bit? When Paul was talking about the 1980s, it reminded me of the 1980s. We had these posters. NRCS had these posters, or SCS at that time. And these posters said you're going to be a no-tiller because of time and money. So some of you might remember that. It had an hourglass and it had some change on a table. And everybody was going to go into no-till because of time and money. And totally missing, the whole soil scenario on it, all the soil function, and bringing carbon into a soil profile. And of course, it's later that we start to put those pieces together. And I think those are the real principal reasons of why you do this. So soil armor, minimizing soil disturbance. And plant diversity. It takes a plant to bring carbon into the soil. When we're taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and putting it in as carbon in our soils, that's the function of the plant. And so the plant does this. When we bring a cover crop in at some point in time, we have a longer period of time that you have carbon coming into your soil. And so you start looking at things like what's going to happen with this carbon that's coming into the soil? Well, one of the first things that happens is it becomes the food source for the biology. The biology is going to build the soil aggregates and the pore spaces. Therein lies your improvement in infiltration, your improvement in soil function. And so it takes a food source to do that, and plants are what do that. That's Paul explained that as he was talking about the stomata of the plant, how the CO2 goes into the stomata, and that carbon is what goes into the soil as a sugar. And that carbon is the food source for the biology. It's how we build soil aggregates. It's how that spongy feeling when you walk on a soil or a field that has high soil health, you feel that sponginess. And when we don't have that, we get a real firmness as our soils compress, because they'll compress without the soil aggregates and pore spaces being placed in them. And then a continual live plant. And basically we're mimicking the original landscape. And so we have a crop that we grow as an annual crop, a cash crop. And if you find a window in your rotation that's long enough for a cover crop, that's the ideal place to put it. And so then we extend the period of time that a plant is harvesting CO2. And we extend this period, and now we bring in additional carbon in a period of time when we normally were dormant. And feeding the biology becomes the name of the game. As the biology improves, it takes a lot of carbon to feed them, it takes a lot of biology. So a continual live plant. And I think cover crops offer multiple benefits. So when you look at a cover crop, it meets a lot of soil health foundation principles simultaneously. And I think it's one of the big values of a cover crop. There's numerous ones, but I think bringing in the carbon is certainly one of the most important. The other thing I try to do with cover crops is not overthink it and just think about the name. It's a cover. And I think that tells us a lot as well. And then livestock integration. I know you'll read some data sometimes that will show 4 principles. Strongly believe there's 5. And livestock integration to me is a very strong principle. Soils, plants, and animals evolved together and built these soils that we farm today in this Bismarck area. They built those soils. And so the thought of leaving out animals or any other portion of this, to me, doesn't make good ecology sense. And so consequently, I'm a firm believer that there's 5 principles. And the livestock integration principle doesn't always start out as the most important one when you're first starting, but ultimately it becomes more important as you go down the road. So with that, just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an overview and kind of set the stage, if you will, for the farmer panel. And what we're going to do is ask each participant to come up. I think one at a time is fine. And we're going to start with Rocky, by the way, so you're going to be lead batter. And we'll start with Rocky Bateman. And each of these individuals, some are in the eastern part of North Dakota, some are in the western or more central part of North Dakota. And between all 5 of them, we're going to start to see these 5 principles. And so as they're participating in the panel, you'll start to see that unfold, and you'll start to see that as it plays out. And so with that, we're going to introduce Rocky Bateman. He farms in Morton County, south of the small town of Judson. His operation includes small grains and row crops. Rocky is an active advocate for North Dakota agriculture. Oh man, that's a lot easier to read now. And recognized as a soil health champion for North Dakota, he serves on the Morton County Soil Conservation District Board. So please help me welcome Rocky Bateman. backup, Rocky. You want to get that part? You put that in your pocket.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today. I think of my story of how I got here today, and in the past I've given a lot of credit, in fact all the credit, to a lot of the soil scientists and the soil health movement around this area. But I would be remiss if I didn't give a little credit to Mark Holcup and the Adult Farm Management Program here at BSC. I've been involved with that since I went to college here. I graduated from here in 1975. There's a couple-year gap in there where I was not in the program, but I think at this point in time I am now the second longest enrolled student at BSC in their recorded history. So I'm waiting for that other guy to quit so I can become number one. But part of my story starts at when I graduated from high school in 1973. I was able to get an option on the neighbor's farm, and we closed that deal in February of 1974. And I was going to college here, commuting every day from New Salem. And I can remember how proud I was of my farm until that one day in the spring when I was driving home and I turned off Interstate 94 by the Sweetbriar Dam. And to the south I could see, and it's 10 miles away, you could see these huge clouds of dirt blowing in the air from 10 miles away. And the worst part of it was my new farm. And that started a process of thinking, you know, that can't be good, and it's worse than that. It wasn't good, and it was mine, and I was dealing with a property that, because of that nature, that soil type was severely, severely damaged, and to the point where production on it and a whole lot of the other factors we measure nowadays were virtually destroyed, and it was because of just the common tillage practice of the time. Some ground probably should have never been farmed. This was, so what do you do with that resource? How do you make it work? I just want to talk about tillage as a whole. To quote our president, it's very, very, very bad. And my job here today is to help you make your soils great again. So anyway, this here is just a chart that I came across. It talks on the left side there, that's native prairie sod, and it doesn't matter what type of soil you had or what the organic matter level was at, if it was 7, 8, 10, 12, whatever. That's the starting point, and we'll give it 100%. And this is a scientific deal. It's been charted on all soils that have ever been tilled, and in about a 50 to 60 year time frame, we've taken that soils from what it was as a native prairie sod, and we've taken it down to about 35%, maybe some a little better, of remaining soil organic matter. It's a continual downtrend. It doesn't matter where your farm is. If you've got really good soils, this is a longer, slower curve. If you farm marginal land, it's way, way faster. I can tell you, Jay was talking yesterday about most soils that you've seen. It's half of what prairie is now, most cropland, the organic matter. And this kind of bears that out. But I would want you to bear in mind, for those that are still continuous farming, you are on a continuous downcline. And even though crop yields are going up, the resource, the land we're dealing with, if you're looking at your soil health, it is on a continual downward decline. I'll go the other way. And yet, we talk about our yields, and I just took corn. This is a national average of what corn yields have done from 1908 until 2011. Continually going up, it's on a rising curve. So how can that be? How can we have better crops at the same time we're having a declining health of our soil? A lot of this is due in part to genetics, and a large part of that is due to the commercial inputs. But to maintain this is cash out of our pocket. We're paying somebody to do this, to give us those things to make this happen. If you haven't noticed, I have, that it seems like every town around has a brand new agronomy center. It's huge business, and their job is to sell us things to keep our soil producing. My goal, I told my fertilizer guy already, one of these years I'm going to take that trip to Hawaii that I'm paying for every year. So, and I wanted to put them together just as a comparison. How can we have a decline in soil health and an increase? On our farm, we farm very marginal ground. It was tilled to death. In places, the topsoil's gone, the subsoil's gone, and we're down to parent material. And how do you make that work? About in here is where we started no-till. Because of our marginal soils and tillage, my system crashed way early. But since that time, we're going to be doing our 20th year of no-till this year, and at this point right here where I made this decision we needed to change, I was at a critical point. My banker had suggested to me that maybe I should consider getting out of farming, you know, and so I prayed a lot about that, and God, being totally fair and just, he went and talked to my banker and found out I wasn't lying. It was the truth. I needed to consider quitting. So, but we had started doing no-till at that time, but my first attempt, I went with a hay buster hoe drill, and Paul, you had a picture of that in one of your deals. It was a paired row with a deep banding fertilizer on it, and very similar to the concept of what a Dutch opener is. And we used that, we started in '99, we used that for 4 years, and I could tell I wasn't gaining anything. Yes, time savings, yes, but as far as soil health, which I knew I needed to fix, it just wasn't doing it. So in 2002, we went to a disc opener. And, but I just wanted you to be aware of one thing. This distance between, we took our soils from 0.7, 0.9% whole farm. At 1% or less, there's not enough biology left to feed the soil, and your system crashes. And what I'm concerned about is I heard last spring Dr. Francine talking about soil samples in the Red River Valley, breadbaskets of the world, starting to come in at 1% organic matter. You know, there's a wreck going on here, and you can see they have not given up on their tillage. I was at that point. We had to change, and right now at this point, and we're going to call that 2017, our last soil tests, we're at 4.5 to 5% organic matter whole farm. And so you can turn it around, but that distance between here and there, what that's given me is all of these things up here that they're trying to sell me to fix what tillage is destroying. Healthy soils is down here, is giving it to me for free. There is not just a handful of change, there's a lot of money down here. We're looking at free nitrogen, we're looking at our mineral cycles, we're looking at our water cycles, and I'll get to the increased productivity on our unit a little bit later. But I would just submit to you at this time, if there's one thing that you could do that would turn your operation around more than anything else out there, I'm going to tell you it's free. The magic pill is just quit tilling the ground. Remove tillage from the landscape and leave it off. In nature, I consider native prairie sod to be the ideal soil profile. These plains around here, that's the way God made them. They've been here this way for thousands and thousands of years. And if you start looking at their attributes, that's what we're trying to duplicate in our no-till cropping systems. And that, on my place, my goal is to take my cropland back to its original state where it was over here. Now, some guys have told me, no, you can't do it. I'm seeing some signs that there are people that are there so that it can be done. And at the Mandan Research Station, they've done a study where they've been, Mark, is it 10 years or 15 years now huh? Okay, they have the integrated deal where they took native prairie sod and started farming it completely no-till. They measured all the attributes that were there, and in the length of this time, it's over 10 years for sure, they have not lost anything. And if you go back to over here, you know, within about 10 years, you've already lost 20, 30% of your organic matter, and they have not lost anything. So that's telling me if they can maintain it, we should be able to build it back. That's what my long-term goal is. Keep going around. Uh-oh, now I'm in trouble. I want to just talk about, did I bring up the wrong paper here? One of the first guys I got to listen to, and Jay, you guys brought him in, was Ralph Derpsch from South America, considered to be the father of no-till. And I don't think if they realize what they started at that time, but what it really has evolved into now is soil health and soil restoration. We're still learning so much, but I just wanted to go through those 4 phases of soil restoration. And I want you to look at, once you commit to no-till and to never working your ground again, you're going to go through about 4 phases. The first one, the initialization one, is about a 5-year period. In that time, he talks about a few things there. Let's see, what's the first one here? You'll start to regenerate your soil structure and increase the microbial activity, but at this stage you might have to add initial or extra fertility. In a traditional tillage system, you're mixing air in with that organic matter every year, and you're firing all that organic matter at one time to feed the crop. When you stop doing that for a period of time, you're going to have to substitute some fertility for that, because you've broke that cycle of firing everything every year, and you need to start building organic matter so you can start taking a percentage of that every year. And you need to grow that as you go forward. And it is a 5-year period. You'll know when you've hit the second phase, because you just go, yes, it works. But I've seen lots of guys get to about year 5 and say it isn't working and quit. And it's just when it's going to take off. The second phase is also a transition period, and in that period, you're going to start to see organic matter building, soil aggregation start to increase, and microbial activity start to come back. And that's about the time that you're going to see your yields start to take off, because all those things that have been depleted in the tillage cycle because you've lost all your organic matter structure start to come back. And nature, if you give it a chance in a no-till system, it immediately starts building itself back towards where it came from. It's native prairie sod, that type of structure. The consolidation period, that's from year 11 to 20. That's just a continuing building, and I want to see what he's got here. This is when your soils often will show an increase in cation exchange capacity as well as increased nutrient cycle. That's when you start getting paid back, and it starts to really build and restore its own health. And then when you hit year 20, it's maintenance. And that's what he's calling it here, but since this article has been written, we know a whole lot more. They were thinking, 20 years in, that's where we're going to have to quit. That's as best as it's going to be, and now we're knowing, this is just the first step. We know what cover crops can do now. There's a whole lot of other things in science that are starting to come out now, and it's exciting to know that this isn't the end, this is just step 1. But in this whole process, 20-year process, the point I want to make here is that if at any time in this process and you decide you need to go out and work that ground just once, you immediately go back to the very first phase and you have to start all over again. So tillage, even one time, even in a soil that's had 20 years to heal itself, you can destroy all that's been done in one tillage pass. So it's so critical that you get the mindset that you never want to till again. This is just a picture of my operation. Now I can tell I learned this morning that I'm doing it all wrong. But we just move over half a row. We've got real rolling hills. It's really sandy. So, tire tracks are some of the things, Paul, you were talking about are really not been an issue. But erosion has been, so we've always just moved over and left that anchored plant in the middle between the rows to hold the ground and to protect the crop in between. That's kind of where I've been coming from, because in our area, it's not uncommon to get a 2-3 inch rain, and about every other year seems to get, we get one of them. And the problem we had, even with trash whippers or anything, is on these types of slopes up here, it would start and follow those whippers and make a channel and wash out all the seed, and you'd have big puddles of mud on the bottom of the hill with all your seed in it and a washout going up on every row. So we quit that. But the This is a spring seeding. I'm seeding corn into sunflower stubble. Now, some people in this country ask why you do that, because everybody likes to plant wheat after sunflowers. But what I learned from Dr. Tanaka in his crop sequencing is that corn is actually probably the best crop to follow sunflowers of all the crops you can raise, and wheat is one of the poorest ones. Corn likes to follow those root systems, like to follow those taproots down. And in the healing process of trying to get this ground to produce again, I looked at root systems. This ground had been in continuous small grains. Wheat, oats, barley, you know, we thought that was a rotation, but the ground didn't know any difference between the roots. It was all small grain roots to them, to the biology in the soil. And so we started looking at a lot of sunflowers. Not only is it a taproot, but what you see above ground is about how much root mass you have below ground. So it's about a 50-50 combination. Small grains are probably 2/3 upper plant, 1/3 root growth, and it's shallow, less than 2 feet or less. We were trying to give this thing back something that occurred naturally in nature. Corn is 50-50. And in this whole process of looking at different root systems, I finally realized why everybody gets so excited about switchgrass. Switchgrass is 10% upper plant growth and 90% root mass, and that's why it's such a huge carbon sink, and it has the ability to do a lot of repair to soil. But this is just kind of the rolling hills I farm, and if you look behind, all of this stuff to behind and to the right of the tractor, that's already seeded. My goal is to be at 2-3% soil disturbance or less. And like Paul had talked this morning, we have the technology now to open a slit, get good soil seed contact, close it back up, and leave everything on the surface just the way it was. Nature builds everything from the top down, so anytime I can duplicate nature as close as I can, it's a good thing. I got a couple of series of pictures. You know, as farmers, we're always so visual, and I've got 3 pictures of harvesting wheat, and I want to show you where I was when I arrived and where I'm at today. This is 1990. This is my summer fallow crop. No organic matter to speak of. We couldn't raise anything anymore. This is when I was having my wreck, and my banker was talking to me very seriously. And you can tell there's no stubble. We swathed as close as we could to the ground, and that's what 15-20 bushel wheat looks like, and that was what my actual production was. And this was in a complete tillage system. But about this time is when I saw what no-till was about, but I'm a little slow sometimes, and I waited a lot longer trying to figure out how can I do this without buying the drill, because I thought that was too expensive. And it wasn't until after I was into it a while I realized that there were so many savings and so many pluses that I should have sold everything and bought the drill the first year I saw it. This is when I knew I had arrived. The reason I have a couple of these pictures, my kids are all in 4-H and they all took photography, so I got a few pictures now and then. But 2008, I don't know if many of you remember, but in our area, a whole lot of people never even took their combines out that year. There wasn't a crop. For me, this is the first time I went by 41 bushels. We had gone in the 20s, upper 20s, lower 30s, upper 30s, and then this year I went to 41. And you can tell that was the first year that I ever went over $500 an acre gross, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. In this area here to the left of the combine, there's a ridge in here. You give that sucker another 10,000 years, it's going to be a big clay butte. It's a bentonite clay type of area, and as long as we ever farmed that sucker, I mean, in the spring it would be too wet, you'd get stuck, and in the summertime it would dry up and you couldn't even make a scratch in it. All those gumbo spots, all them clay spots on our farm are gone. You don't see them. So for people that say, well, no-till only works out west, it won't work over east because we've got heavy clay soil, I can show you on my farm where every one of them spots have disappeared. They are now functioning and producing, and you don't even see them anymore. Once in a while, if it's really, really wet, you might feel them a little bit when you roll over them with the tractor, but you go right over and they produce. Just to clarify what happened here, you can see I'm dropping the straw. I took pity on 2 very, very good friends of mine to live north of interstate that year, and they had planned on haying what little bit of grain they had to make hay, and they hailed out 100%, both of them. So I says, if you come bale the straw, we'll do it on shares. It was a one-time deal. We spread the chaff, but that straw behind there is almost knee-high. And that's the first year that things really, really took off. For me, it was a dry year. My water cycle was functioning, and we got a crop when nobody else did. And then I want to take you to 2 years ago. When I started no-tilling, my goal was based upon, Kenny and I used to argue I just didn't have enough water, and he says, no, you've got enough water, you're looking at it wrong. And he was right, because pretty soon my water cycle restored, and we started getting yields way beyond what, we thought you could raise on an X amount of inches of moisture in the ground. This year was in 2015. This area in here, this is northwest. All them northwest winds come down here. This is some ground I rent. It is severely damaged from wind erosion. It was conventional tilled until about 9 years ago, when I picked it up. It had been single pass seeding 2 years with a rigid shank, and I went to a disc opener, and this is year 5. Again, that's the year it took off. You would never know that in years prior to this, it was just below sand. The other thing I would like to show you is on my combine, and Russ is here, he's got video of it, I don't know if he still does, but that's a 30-foot rigid head, and we're spreading straw the full distance. We did take the knife part out of the chopper, and we try and keep the straw as large as we can. This straw here, in the foreground here, that's knee-deep straw. My goal when I started was to raise 50 bushel wheat and 100 bushel corn, and we did it in 18 years. So I never expected the yield increases that we got, but we did. So again, please, long-term, the best thing you can ever do for your ground is just put the plow away, sell it. Like Dwayne Beck told me at one meeting, he says, I asked about harrowing, he says, one time and then sell the thing so you're never tempted to use the damn thing again. So we did. It works. And that's why I wanted to share it with you. Thank you.
Use the handheld to talk while the next one sets up.
Thank you, Rocky. Okay, did we hear any principles?
You want to bring that one down? Yeah.
Did we hear any principles regarding disturbance, soil disturbance? Right? Yeah. Did you hear anything regarding armor or residue on the surface? Yeah. Did we have some crop diversity in there as well? Different crop types? Yeah. So I think we're off to a good start. I'm going to borrow that from you, Paul.
Travis is next.
Yeah. Our next speaker is going to be Travis Wolf, and he has a farming and ranching operation west of Mandan near the Sweetbriar Creek. His operation includes beef cattle, small grains, and row crops. Travis is a valued member of the Morton County SCD Soil Health Mentor Team, and he was a mentor of the Morton SCD Board for 6 years and continues to serve as an advisory board member as well. And I've had the opportunity to be on Rocky's farm over the years, and also more recently on Travis's as well. Both gentlemen do an excellent job, and we're appreciative that they're willing to speak with us today. So with that, please help me welcome Travis Wolf. I will hand those out. Leave me one. Thank you. You can just do up arrow, down arrow. Yep.
I guess I'm not a big public speaker, but they've asked me to do this. We're going to do it anyway. I am a minimum till, no-till farmer. This is our air drill. We do no-till all of our row crops and stuff like that. We are a one-pass operation. What I've gotten into in the last 3 years, I got into cover crops. Probably with the help of Don Tanaka. Dr. Tanaka's pushed me probably more than anybody to start. We've been very successful with cover crops. We integrate the cattle. With that, my next picture, this is a picture on our farm. This was in our mentorship program. This was, what we do is we put a cover crop in behind oats and peas, barley and peas, or a hay crop of sorts. This was actually ground that hailed off 2 years ago. And we're seeding back into oats regrowth. It regrew on us just because of the hail till we got that far. We've been very successful doing this. Part of it with what we're looking at, I guess, is I look at the livestock side more and I look at the economic side of it. I'm trying to figure out how to get my cows to pay for it so I can get everything underground done for free. This was a mix on that ground we put in this spring. We did our oats, barley, pea mix and everything with all of the cover crops tied into it. We've done both ways. We've tried doing it with the first crop. We've planned to come back in mid-July and reseeded. Myself, I've had better luck reseeding. This was this cover crop mix, how it grew up. It wasn't overly high in forage, but it's still, we had a lot of underground growth. Our cows did very well on this. With what I've learned on my own farm, I like to have cover crops, but I like to either have, I graze all my cover crops starting the 1st of November generally. We wean our calves and we turn the cows out of cover crops to condition our cows back for the rest of the winter and get us through. We'll graze this, and we like to have standing or combine corn next to it for forage or for basically fill. One of our goals with our cover crops is we're trying to raise as high a protein cover crops as we can get. This last year we've been very successful. This is a different field that we planted in mid-July. After we pull the hay off, we get it back in and seed it as fast as we can. This is another mix we've done. This is the first year we did this exact mix. This is what the field looks like, or looked like. The plan was to graze this past November. Mother Nature did not agree with us. It's currently sitting under snow. We're gonna go back, and the hopes is to graze this here with pears this spring, which that doesn't bother me. We're gonna graze it at some point. I'm not gonna lose value on it. Here's another picture early on. That cover crop was in our field this fall, which Jay was on. That was probably knee-high, pretty consistently, thicker than the hair on your head, beautifully. And when I look at my sample, this is a forage sample taken the 2nd of November. It was 27.9% crude protein. And I know we've had discussions with my vet and some different nutritionists, and they say that's too high, but our cows actually utilize our corn stalks better if we can get our protein up in our cover crops. That's one thing I've learned. My cows will walk over the fields. They will leave more residue, it seems like, if our protein's a little higher because they trample more, which I'm fine with that. We've been successful, and that's why I say I like to have corn stalks near my fields or grass that hasn't been grazed, something for fill. This cover crop is not cheap, but I guess I don't look at my cost. I think this cover crop costs us $55 an acre to put in. But on 30 acres, if you take $55, it's less than $1,800. You can't buy a semi-load of feed for that. A semi-load of feed only takes me 6 days to burn up with my cows. So if I can graze this for 6 days, it's paid for. And this will extend our grazing season phenomenally, and that's that handout they handed out. As part of it's the economics end of it. We could pay for our cover crop in in 18 days, we can more than pay for our cover crop, including our cost to pay ourselves to do it. We've done it very minimum. We don't generally fertilize our cover crops. We've had very successful getting the tonnage without doing it. With this grazing, we've actually extended our cows. I'm currently calving. I'm an earlier calver. I'm in the middle of calving right now, and we actually, a lot of years, will not put our cows on full rations until we start calving. Our cows will graze cover crops, they'll graze residues of some sort. That's done phenomenal to our bottom line. This last year, obviously, Mother Nature didn't want to cooperate. We have fed a little bit harder this year, but we're hoping to go back to these residues in the spring with pears. So it's not going to be a loss. I don't believe in that. I don't believe that. I mean, this has helped us, and also in our farming operation, we always feed cattle near the cover crops. We've got a hay shredder. We carry all of our rations to our cows in the fields, make them walk. We don't feed around home if we can't help it. I mean, our cows will walk up to a mile a day for feed from water. It's been very productive on us. Our calving's been very easy when our cows get the good exercise. This winter, our cows have been confined a little bit more. We'll see how that's going to work out for us, but so far, so good. I don't know. Here's one of our cover crops as it's coming up. We put it in with the shank drill, minimum till. We've had very good success doing it with that. We try to get an extreme mix of some sort. I mean, minimum 6 to 7 is very minimum. We try 9 to 10, 11. The more the merrier, and like I said, part of what I'm picking out is for protein. It's a cheap way for protein. It's a cheap way to condition cows to get them back in shape after you pull calves off. And I mean, the corn stalks to me is needed with it, or grass, just to make it all work right. With that, mine's simple and short. I mean, we can go from that. I will be around.
Thank you, Travis. Okay, Mr. Steckler, Aaron Steckler will be the next one. What principles did we just talk about, soil health with Travis Wolf? We talked a little bit about cover crops. Yeah, a little bit about a continual line plant. And the diversity he's using. One thing we learned about cover crops over the years, when they have more diversity in a much safer grazing environment. It's a lot safer than grazing in monoculture, for instance. And so that scenario, I think we're hearing play out with Travis's comments. And having a chance to walk across those cover crops last year, they were impressive. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Aaron Steckler, farm and ranch near St. Anthony, North Dakota. Stecklers have been using no-till for 14 years and have increased use of cover crops for grazing, building organic matter and soil armor. John has been participating in the Morton County SCD Soil Health Mentor Program for 3 years and is a soil health champion for North Dakota. Aaron is the newest elected member of the Morton County SCD, so please help me welcome Aaron Steckler.
Okay.
That'll run.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Aaron Steckler, and kind of wish my dad could be here today. He's kind of the brains and behind everything that we do, and has come up with a lot of the methods that we try to implement on our farm and ranch now. But he was able to take a vacation this week, and so that's good for him. And I guess after all these years of trying to figure out how to get the boss away and how to get dad on a vacation, I figured out that all you got to do is threaten him with a little public speaking opportunity, and plans get made pretty quick. So for you young guys in the crowd, there's a little trick to getting the boss away for a little bit. But like Jay said, we been farming no-till now, complete no-till for about 14 years. It all started with the no-till drill that you can see here. Did us a lot of good and changed a lot of things on our operation. We've since changed color in drills, but I'm not going to knock one or the other, because if you work with them and adjust them and use them the right way, they both of them work really well. Another purchase we made kind of right away when going into no-till, Paul kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, is the stripper head, and we've really enjoyed that. Using it over the years, as you can see in the picture here, it evenly spread, it doesn't take all that residue through the combine and chop it up and spit it out the back. We've got even distribution of all that crop residue without running it through the combine. It's all standing there, catches a lot of snow in the wintertime if we get snow. And even if we don't get much, it catches what little bit does blow across the field. And it's evenly distributed. So, I mean, we would probably never go back to just using a platform on our cereal grains, just because that stubble has been so valuable to us, and as far as soil armor and catching snow in the wintertime. And it also makes it a lot easier in the springtime to seed through all that residue, not trying to seed through a thick mat of chopped up residue. So, and here's just a picture of some flax seeded into the stubble. I just like to show these pictures because you can see that there's very little, if any, disturbance of the residue in the soil. It's seeded right through, coming up pretty well. This is the flax field, this is the same field, just a little bit later on in the growing season. So as you can see, there's a lot of soil armor there. So we've accomplished that principle of soil health right away. And that helps with, keeps whatever little bit of rain we do get, keeps the sun from drying that out really quickly. And I guess, it took us a few years after we started no-till to get interested in the cover crop thing, because we're just trying to get used to the whole concept of no-till. It was a pretty tough thing to switch over to. But as years went by, we started to do a few different things with cover crops, and we've come to really enjoy a few of the things that we've come up with. Being part of the mentor program in Morton County, we've been able to try a few different things that we probably normally wouldn't have on our own, and they've become, or what will be most likely, permanent things in our operation. So a few examples of how we do cover crops. Starting off, where we started was a post-harvest cover crop after we combined our wheat or lentils or peas, whatever the crop may be, going in and seeding a cover crop in the fall. We've now moved on to doing some more full season cover crops, which the goal there is mainly because we do have cattle to create some grazing and extend the grazing season into late in the fall and into the winter months. Also kind of a dual purpose cover crop, which I'll touch on a little more in detail later. And then we also do covers that work for spring grazing as well. And then another example I'll talk about. So the post-harvest cover crop that we implement now, we don't really do any of it on our wheat stubble or oats, things like that. But simply because we don't have the time to run the seeder over all those acres again in the fall. But where we did see a big need for it was on our legume crops like peas and lentils, where there's a minimal amount of residue after you're done harvesting, lots of bare soil, there's no standing residue to catch snow or kind of block the wind from getting wind erosion on the soil. And so we thought it was pretty high priority to get a cover crop put in. This particular field right here was seeded into lentils this year, and a couple weeks after harvest we came back in with a cover crop. We were lucky enough to get some rains this fall, and we got some good growth off of it. It was a pretty simple mix. We just had a few things laying around the farm, that we threw in there, and didn't go out and spend a lot of money on this cover, just kind of use what we had around. And the one thing that's not listed there is the volunteer lentils that came back. So we also had a cool season broadleaf legume in there that was also a part of the mix. And that's what that picture is. You can just see those volunteer lentils coming back up with the cover crop. This is another picture of another lentil field that we seeded into cover crop. This one, there's a lot more lentils in. We seeded a lot of lentils with the combine on this particular field. We had a little bit of a mess up there, so this one was pretty heavy in lentils, and the idea was to come back and graze it. But like in most situations this year, the snow took care of that idea. So that's okay though, because we're still going to have that all that residue there on the soil, and it's going to go back into building soil health. Our full season cover crops, we're trying to accomplish there most of the principles of soil health, soil armor, diversity, having a really diverse mix, like Travis talked about before, getting 8 or 9, 10, maybe even 10 different species into a mix, just to have that diversity. Continual live root growth. You've got a full season of growth here, whether you leave that for grazing, later in the summer and maybe get some regrowth off of it, or just leave it go until a killing frost and graze it later on, or don't do anything with it at all. And lastly, like I said, most of our stuff is geared toward livestock integration, so the full season cover crop allows us to do that by grazing in the fall. This is an example of a mix that we used this year, and it's kind of, our full season mix is pretty similar year to year. We maybe change a few things here or there, but I guess it's good to not get complacent with what you like. You always want to try new things and to get more diversity in your soil. This is a picture of one of those mixes after a killing frost, and something that we'll go back in and graze. Pheasant hunted on this field this fall, and it was a pretty awesome experience. I had some friends from out in the eastern part of the state, and they'd never seen so many pheasants before. I mean, it was just crawling with wildlife. Pheasants, grouse, kicked a few deer out of there, which for our area is kind of rare. We don't have very many deer around. So one of the other things you get with growing cover crops is not only diversity in soil biology, but in wildlife as well. This is just another example. This is actually a field that we had enrolled in the soil health mentor program the last few years. So it's a pretty diverse mix, as we were trying to use a few different things that we maybe hadn't used before and see how they grew. What I thought was pretty interesting about this field when we had our field tour is we were out there kind of looking to identify all the different species and what they looked like. And what was pretty neat is because we have, this cover crop, which is probably 3 to 4 feet tall, pretty consistently at that time throughout the field. We had flax in the mix, and that flax was up to 2 feet tall. It was, trying to compete with the rest of the plants and get to sunlight. So we had flax that was growing that tall. It was kind of neat to see. The dual purpose cover crop, I guess is what I call it. Something else we learned, tried out in the mentor program. We thought it was pretty handy to accomplish full season growth and have a live root growing in the soil during the whole growing season. And then if we're lucky enough to get enough regrowth, we can integrate the livestock and graze it afterwards. So I guess what our idea here is to, we already grow oats and peats for hay. And so what we did was mix a few different varieties of cover crop in there just to get some added diversity. And then later on, once we did hay it off, we could come back, and if we got regrowth, we could graze it or just leave it grow on its own for the rest of the season. Here's an example of one of those fields when we started cutting it. You can see some of the different cover crops growing amongst the oats and peas there. This is a pretty good vantage point. I thought just so you could see how those cover crops grow within the oats and peas. And while we're cutting it down, we like to leave about 8 inches of stubble, just so we give those covers, we're not cutting them off so close to the ground, and they've got a better chance to regrow. And plus, you're just leaving a little more cover there for the soil in case things dry out and you don't get regrowth. You've got something there that's going to give a little bit of armor to the soil. Here's a couple pictures of regrowth on the left, holding up a radish there, and kind of at the tip of my index finger you can see where that main stem was cut off when we hayed the peas and oats. But then you can also see what kind of regrowth we got there on that particular plant. And then on the right is a picture of the annual ryegrass that was a part of the mix. And this is something that really doesn't grow until after we've cut the oats and peas off. And this particular species, the cows really love it. It's the first thing they go for when we graze it in the fall. And I got a really interesting picture of that next here. But on the left, there's just another example of the regrowth. And on the right is that ryegrass. And what I think's really neat about it is the root system that it has. It's a really dense, fibrous root system and holds a lot of soil together. This particular plant, anytime you pull one of those lumps of ryegrass out of the ground, you bring a whole mess of soil with it. And this picture is kind of a smaller chunk, but I shook this off just so you could kind of see the root system growing in it, and you can tell that soil has some structure, so it's doing some good, not only above the ground for the cattle, but you can see it's probably doing more good below the ground and building structure to the soil. One of the things I don't really have any pictures for is our spring grazing. And this is a little different from the other cover crops. This is basically just a monoculture for us. In the fall, we'll seed some winter triticale and let it come up in the spring and use that for grazing. We aim to calve starting the 10th of May, and so we calve in May and June, which is pretty late. So we always like to have the cattle, not right by the yard, but within a mile or two of the yard. Just in the rare event that we do have issues with calving, they're not too far away from the yard. And not having enough grass that close, this was a way that we could get some more grazing closer to the yard. We do fertilize this. We put some nitrogen on there in the spring when it's coming up. But we got to make sure to graze that before it heads out and gets rank. Otherwise, the cows will just leave it. And we're guilty of doing that. Sometimes we're busy and we just don't get to grazing it. But then we've also got the option of cutting it down for hay. So it all works out in the end. But after we've grazed it, or in the event that we had to hay it down, usually we'll go back in with a full season cover crop, see how that mix does. And a lot of times, if we end up grazing it again late in the summer, we'll go back in the fall with the triticale again, just so we have some more grazing the following spring. So we're accomplishing livestock integration there. We've got a root system growing the whole growing season. So I think it's a pretty effective way of building soil health, because you're just using those principles one after the other and on top of each other, and something to accelerate in building soil biology. The last one I'm going to touch on here was just something that happened this year when I saw the opportunity to put in a cover crop. We were extremely dry in the months of May and June, with about 2 inches of moisture in those 2 months. And this particular wheat field was seeded onto sunflower ground, so there was basically no soil armor. It's a pretty heavy gumbo ground, and the hot, dry weather, it dried out just really quickly. The crop burnt up, and it was a complete loss. And that early in the growing season, it was kind of it didn't really sit well with me that there was nothing growing there for so long in the growing season. So what we decided to do is come up with a mix and go ahead and seed a cover crop in there, just to get some armor on that soil and keep a live root growing, get some roots down in the soil profile, maybe help break up a little bit of hard pan. This particular piece of ground, it's got a long ways to go soil health wise, so I figured might as well get started on it now. And we got a few rains late in the summer. That cover crop came up really nice and green and got some good growth out of it. So it caught a lot of snow this winter, and hopefully that cover will help me out this spring when I'm trying to seed another crop. So I guess that's all I got. We try to do a few different things and see what works, see what doesn't work, and that's all you can do. You learn a lot more from the times you fail than the times you succeed. So thank the Soil Health Mentor Program for allowing us to experiment with a few different things and see what works. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. So you can see both Travis and Aaron covered livestock integration quite well. This is the last speakers. And they've done an excellent job in that regard. And you could also see, armor, you could see disturbance coming out, you could see crop diversity, and you could see the cover crops in terms of a continual live plant, and all of these things were happening. Also, Aaron, what you might want to share with John is that, you know, I kept the soils from your farm in my rainfall simulator, and I used them quite a while afterwards also. And they infiltrated very well. So that part, just to let you know, I did steal some soil from Morton County. So, okay, with that, our next speaker is Dana Fletcher. And Dana's in the Courtney area. And he farms primarily in Stutsman County, a little bit in Griggs. Small grains, pinto beans, no glasses, I don't know where they went, probably here. Only gets better and better. Okay, here we go. Pinto beans, soybeans, and corn. And he's recently added cover crops, and he's transitioning to a no-till system. And so we're all somewheres on this road, and thought it would be pretty interesting to have some people kind of from the eastern part of North Dakota talk a little bit about the soil health principles as well. Had a chance to be on Dana's farm last fall, and it was very impressive to see what he's done with cover crops, and I think you'll enjoy it as well. So with that, please help me welcome Dana Fletcher. Put that in your pocket, and I'll hook this on you. You can just slide it in your pocket.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Yeah. And you're good.
My name's Dana Fletcher. I farm in the northeast part of Stutsman County near Courtney. And our soil is heavy and poorly drained. Salinity has become a major issue in our area. Most farmers are conventional tillage, and looking into salinity took me down the soil health path, and I'm trying to switch to no-till. The main field I'm going to talk about today, I wanted to try seeding rye with the possibility of going to grain or seeding soybeans in it. And I reported it as a cash crop at the FSA office and insured it. And when spring came around, soybean prices came up, I decided I was going to plant the whole field to soybeans. And I had to get a crop released, and by the time the adjuster came down, it was like May 18th before I got it seeded, and most of the soybeans in my area had been seeded. And when on the 18th when the adjuster left, I went out and started seeding, so there was no chemical kill at that time. And the rye was in the grassy stage, and even after a rock roller went over it, it would spring back up other than the tractor tracks. And my chemical rep recommended I wait 2 days before killing it off to allow recovery from the rye so we'd get a better kill. And a 3.5-inch rain came 2 days later, and my 2 days ended up being 10 days. And in the 10 days that passed, the rye went from the grassy stage to fully headed out, and it was huge. And that ended up being on the 28th, and on the 28th there was a big rain event forecast to come, and the ground was still a little wet, and I told the sprayer guys to go ahead and spray it, and they came back and said the tall rye carried the sprayer just fine, and they got it sprayed. And there you can see how big it got, and you can see I had a really good kill, and that was just a quart of Roundup. The soybeans were popping through the ground at the time, so pre-plant chemical was out of the question, although I didn't have a weed in it, and saw no reason to put a pre-plant on at that time. This picture was taken when I thought there was hope that I would have a crop, because I could see rows on the hill. And this was what it looked like on June 15th. You can see a few more rows. And this part of the field, the sprayer had a boundary issue with their GPS system, and they had like a whole section that shut off, and I had a fairly large skip. And this skip wasn't sprayed till June 13th, and so that was like 26 days after seeding. And so there was a lot of, the rye even grew even larger than what it was, but it all ended up falling down pretty decent. Then by July 6th, this is the last photo I took of the field, because after that it pretty much looked like a normal soybean field. And right around leaf drop, I had, I was going to go whole hog into the cover crops on this piece, and my aerial spray seeded a mix of annual rye, rape, and turnips. And they were seeded on September 5th. I could have seeded them a little bit earlier. Right now, the only thing that's coming through at this picture is the rape seed. And the soybeans were the best field I've ever had, but all the soybeans in my area were. A lot of the pods there have 4 beans in there, you can see. After harvest, this is what it looked like on Halloween. With that kind of residue, I did have my biology, I was conventionally tilled the year before, so this is going from conventional tillage to no-till. I don't have much biology to take out the cereal rye, and combining before noon and an hour close to sunset was about the range of I could go without skidding the straw. But as long as it was dry, combining was not an issue. And the cover crop didn't bother the combine. I thought it actually helped hold more of the straw down. And then 4 months later, this is what it looks like. This was taken on the 18th, just 10 days ago or so. And here's a close-up. I should say right here, the rapeseed had froze off on October 12th, and the turnips ended up being the dominant brassica in here. And you can't see the annual ryegrass, but it was a nice, even, light stand of ryegrass. You can see some of the dead ryegrass in this picture, and some of it is even still alive. And then we got another 2 months of a decay to go on that, so I'm hoping I have a good seed bed come this spring. I have to have a drink. On all my wheat and barley stubble, after this worked out so well for me, I decided to seed rye on every acre, and I'm going to seed beans into cereal rye. But we've got a lot of cattails and water in our area, and I haven't disked for a few years. I've been gyre mooring all my cattails, and when I was seeding through the wheat, and the sloughs were pretty dry, and I just seeded rye right through the cattail sloughs, and some of it did come up. They haven't been farmed for many, many years, and it's a mulch, so maybe the rye will help dry out the sloughs. And this is some of my wheat and barley stubble pictures. The rye looks like it survived the winter very well. This was taken on the 19th. And here's some more. It looks like it never was bothered by any freezing all winter long. Here's a picture of a rotting radish. And there's still a crimson clover alive in there, and the rye is still doing well. Since we have so much water, this is a full section here. It looks like a half section, but it's been stretched. Normally I'll seed this whole section to one, the whole thing to soybeans, and most of the time around the edges near the sloughs, the soybeans, there's nothing there. And I established this line by, when I was still conventionally tilling, telling the guy in the digger, just only dig where you see soybean stubble. And that's how the line was established the year before. And we seeded barley on this, and then this is how it looked. The barley came up nice in the, if I had had soybeans where the barley is, there'd be very little stand. I mean, there was no stubble the year before, so it's a little tough to spray when you're trying to spray around these corners. And Lee Breeze was the one that came up with this idea, and he told, he goes, farmers have section control on your sprayers, so don't worry about it. And then turnips, I like them because they can survive to the spring and live, but they can also survive to the fall. This turnip made it through 3 chemical passes, the pre-plant and 2 afterwards, and they can get stuck in your cutter bar, and you will get out of the combine and pull it off. And I guess I've been told that to watch out on these in a rotor combine because they can act like a rock and do some damage on the back of your concave. And then I experimented with airplane seeding and corn. I've got 20-inch spacing corn, and it was aerial seeded on the 27th of July, and 20-inch corn and cover crops don't go well together. I don't know if I'll do this again. I might just seed cereal rye after I combine next year. I don't have a chopping head, but the corn just flattened out. I have big duals and not that big a corn head. And otherwise, I mean, I do have the roots in the ground, and we'll see what happens this spring, how that will go for no-tilling. On this field that I had the rye on, the rye was real young, and in the fall of 2015 it was real dry, and I was in the yard working, and there was a huge dust storm, and the sky turned black. I thought it was going to rain, and it was just dust was darkening the sky. And I hopped in my pickup, and I wanted to run down and see what my rye field was doing, and there was another pinto bean field on the way there, and it had let loose, and I had to drive through zero visibility to get to my field. And what was nice about it is the rye was just thick enough and just high enough that my field never blew. The pinto bean stubble was blowing, but the dirt stayed down. And so it's made farming kind of interesting for me now. And I think that we're doing something good with this. So thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I think we get a different look from the eastern part of the state, and we find some different resource concerns, but you still see foundation principles. And so these principles are universal. The next speaker, I've known for a long time, and he used to come to some soil health meetings as a young man. And now the amazing thing is he looks just as young now as he did a long time ago. I don't know what his secret is, but we're glad that he's going to be joining us. Jeremy Wilson, and he farms in Stutsman County near Jamestown, and has a diverse operation. I know he's got a lot of irons in the fire, so we didn't have a chance to visit this morning about a bit more of a formal introduction, so we'll let you take care of that when you start as well. And I just want to share one quick comment with you before we start. The other evening, after I'd fallen asleep in my chair and I woke up again, on the television was Nova. So is anyone here old enough to watch Nova? Yeah? Okay, Daryl watches Dana. So we got some people who watch Nova. And there was a discussion on carbon. And the presenter had a diamond. Is working? And he had the diamond in this container. And the diamond is 100% carbon. And so they subjected the diamond to extreme heat, extreme cold. And the 100% carbon diamond converted to CO2 in the container. And it was just amazing to watch it. But does that not describe agriculture too? The carbon in our residue, the carbon in our soils, as it converts to CO2, goes back to the atmosphere. Do you ever see it? Can you see it? No, but it happens. And so it was the same way watching Nova with a diamond, 100% carbon, as it converted back to CO2. So it was really interesting. You know, for old men with no lives, it's really great. You know, it's really, really good. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy and ask him to share a little information with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
And thanks for inviting me today. So we turned back the clock 2 years. We wanted to make some changes in our operation there at Jamestown. And we had been doing a lot of tillage and minimum tillage.
You gotta stay in front of this mic for the sake of the video.
That's the video.
Oh, all right. Hello, Jeremy Wilson, checking in. I'm here now. Still nervous, though. So, well, maybe I'll just get into a little bit about ourselves and our farm first. And maybe I'll get into some whys more towards the end. But this is Jamestown, I-94, 281. So we're kind of spread out along those areas. We are growing our farm. Seems like at a fairly good pace as we go through the years. We're seeding about 4,000 of that into cropping. We've been farmers for a lot of years. Our history goes back in this area, or in Jamestown, from right around 1920. But before that, we farmed in a lot of other states. Some of those I wish we were still farming in. But our principal crops were corn, soybeans, wheat. We started getting into this corn, and they gave us some earlier varieties, and it's been doing really well for us. So we've kind of transitioned into more corn. We used to grow a lot of wheat, barley, sunflowers. In the past, we've grown all sorts of different crops. But we're doing some no-tillage into sunflowers to save on moisture through the 80s. We're a bit dry. And we did a little bit more and more of that through the late 90s there. We saw some benefits, and we were just trying different things to see what we could do and what was causing that. And the more we learned, the quicker our adoption rate, of course, was. And in 2001, we bought ourselves a single disc opener, no-till drill, and we haven't turned back since. We've been no-tilling then continuous for 16 years. For 15 years of cover crops, I would say the first 6 or 8 or so years, we were thinking one cover crop here for this reason was it, until we learned from, well, you guys right here in Burleigh County about the diverse mix of cover crops and what that looks like and how that is beneficial for the soil. That was the missing piece of the first 4 to 6 years of our cover crops that we didn't have good results. We get a lot of attention. There's been over 200 folks from all sorts of different countries. I only speak English, so I've learned to do with translators. That's pretty fun. Like I said earlier, we're doing some monocrops, oats in this field and then winter wheat in this field, and we're gonna really figure this out. What really got us into cover crops early is when we stopped doing tillage, we had all this residue and we were thinking it was gonna be a problem. It wasn't, it disappeared so fast. Then it was back to worse than our tillage. We thought, well, what's the deal with this? So as long as the ground is 100% covered, and you'll see on your coasters, that's the first thing on that list, soil armor. That couldn't be more important on our farm today, many years down the line. So, Jay, would you hand one of those up to me? I want to refer to that a couple times. So we needed these different covers, so we tried the sorghum side on this field, and then Siberian millet in this field, and we'll try German over here, and then we'll try some, that didn't work real good, so we'll try some vetch here and there. But it wasn't until we come down and did some touring in this area where we saw these mixes, some really diverse mixes. And we put together some of our own mixes, and we're getting much more diverse as we go along. We're learning a little more about it. But in 2007, when I saw that and saw the benefits, when you mix them together, it really switches on. So you can see our acreage of trying different things greatly increased when we started getting these mixes. Unfortunately, then we kind of took wheat out of our rotation. We're going to do that for short term because the corn and soybeans were really paying in our area. And the exports were on fire, and it really paid us. So I figured 4 to 6 years without wheat will be okay, and then we'll put wheat back in rotation and we'll stop degrading our soils. After 2 years, I was sick of it. We hurt the soils a lot faster than I thought going to just a corn and soybean. It was astounding watching that happen. But these diverse cover crops are really it. You see it kind of goes down. When we lost our diversity of having wheat and different crops in rotation, only having corn and soybeans, it really cut the windows of opportunity out for cover crops. We hadn't got our techniques perfected in interseeding in corn, and our chemical programs were overlapping to get rid of all these weed problems we have. We have water hemp in our area now, so we're playing with that. We put in a little bit more wheat again, and then we can get our fall seeded cover crops in. A lot more wheat, we can get a lot more acres in. We're going into a full every acre of corn this fall because of an early harvest we got rye seeded into. So next spring, all of our soybean acres will go into rye. A portion of our corn acres too will be seeded into rye. It's a little bit nervous about that, but we're on kind of learning more about that. So doing this soil health transition for us has been more exciting every year that we go along. We're always out seeding earlier now. We don't have to wait for it to dry out. If we have a living root, this is even an easier and better bet. We seed late. This is some added land, and when I landed a contract, ground was frozen, but those drills are pretty heavy. So we put rye out there on a good portion of it until we ran out of rye, and because we didn't plan on it, it was kind of late anyway. We had actually figured we're going to lose all that rye and all the money invested into that, but it turned out where we had seeded in the frozen ground in the spring, it came up. We filled that fallow period in the spring before soybeans, because a lot of times our soybeans don't get started until maybe May 10th, and we'll seed through June 10th. But if it warms up in March, there's just about 2 months of time where we have a fallow condition and all of our soil biology is dying one by one. And the ground temperature can get too hot, and we'll have trouble maintaining that, number one, soil armor. So in the spring, you can see what that looked like. Not a real good canopy. When we seed late like that, we've learned to up our seeding rate. One thing with these cover crops we learned, we really like that spring fallow period field, and we like to seed green. I'll use some tag words that are getting popular now, where you seed green is one of them. So we're seeding pinto beans here into stripper cut stubble into a winter wheat cover crop. And it's raining. It rained most of that day. Those live roots, not only do they help us get across our soils and hold the weight of the equipment to not damage the soils or cause compaction, but they're also providing a food source and some more residue for our soils. We coined the term catch and release your nutrients. You know, I suppose I've been saying that for 6 to 10 years, but I think we're past that. You know, that's what's happening, but more importantly is we're catching carbon. Our focus has turned more and more to getting more carbon out there. That's what we need to make our soils better. So those pinto beans don't seem to mind. We played with winter wheat for 3 or 4 years, maybe more. Sometimes when you get towards the end of the last field you pull into, sometimes gets headed out, and you have a nice wheat crop, it's hard to kill it. Especially when you don't have any money invested into it, but that year pinto beans were going to be a good play. You can see the headed out wheat. We just see those pinto beans in there with no fertilizer, and they just do their own thing, and they seem to be pretty happy. So focus on soil health. We can have good results. Some added land with nothing growing out there. This did not blow this spring, where all the other fields were blowing in the area. In our area, I suppose we got one neighbor probably that does some soil health, and is getting into I would say an avid no-tiller now doing soil health, but we're still kind of an island of soil health in our area. Surprisingly, our results are fabulous, but it's still hard to get past that. You know, going to change your whole operation to do it. My neighbors still say they're too far north, but I've made friends with Derek Axton. He's up in Canada. He's doing the soil health principles and having great results. These cover crops, some folks say they're too wet or they're too dry, but once again, find a good mentor, and you know, Derek Axton's a pretty dry area. But if you wanted to learn how to do no-till and cover crops when it's real dry, you know, find a mentor such as Rick Bieber. He's always in a drought. But finding a mentor has been really, really good for us. I took a lot of advice from the folks in South America, Ralph Dirch, and another fellow that you guys have brought up. I learned a lot from your county and bringing these good speakers up, so thank you for that. Yep, Adam Muir was a great speaker. But these guys are doing this soil health principle, the same things, under 60 inches of rainfall per year. So our measly 18 inches doesn't seem like too much then, even if it comes in 5 or 8 inch shots. Well, this year, this is usually underwater, this area the picture is taken, and his corn was underwater before seeding, and then we seeded it, and then it was back underwater. Then it emerged, went back underwater again. We had 38 inches of rain this year. From corn planting to the end of May, we had right at 9 inches. We seeded most of our crops through that, or during that time period, without problems. We had a great stand of corn. That's a rye cover crop, I guess. We just knew it was important to get roots out there early, get the soil turned on, and then we can lay some crops out there. Here's one after soybean harvest. We laid a bunch of rye out. Then we got a bunch of wind. All of our residue blew away in the fields where we didn't seed. In the fields where we did seed, the residue blew away too. It stripped our fields bare. We even lost a really small amount of soil. Our tillage neighbors lost a lot of soil. like Dana Fletcher had said, there's times when there's zero visibility on gravel roads, and when you go to check your no-till farm or your soil health farm, it sure was encouraging. We weren't losing barely any soil. This is one of my worst ones, and this is the day after a really bad windstorm. And I knew we were bare out here. I wanted to see how if my rye was completely destroyed by the sandblasting it got. It did okay. You know, a month later, we're seeded into it. It's over knee high. We're planting corn out there. Killed it off. It was headed out, and the rye was V3. It's not what we were trying to do, but we harvested a good crop there. We've been seeing some different things with different varieties responding to the rye. On corn, there's 3 varieties, with rye, without rye. I had the biggest difference. With rye, without rye, with rye, without rye. So really it's not significant. That's been 2 years in a row. We'll try for 3 years in a row, and we'll see. The neat thing about it this year is when I went out into the soybean stubble and seeded rye after soybean harvest, it was actually late November this year, but I plugged 1 row every 30 inches, so I have 3 rows of rye, 1 row that's bare. The bare rows are on 30-inch centers, so we'll just seed our corn right in that bare row. Maybe we'll have a little less competition. We're killing the rye with Roundup. It's real easy to do. There's not much else out there for weeds, which is nice. It's a really good tool against a water hemp if you ever get to have a chance to battle that. But we're using Roundup as long as we have that Roundup Ready corn or soybeans. It doesn't seem to bother them. I've been warned on using Roundup to kill some cover crops. If you don't have a Roundup tolerant crop afterwards, there's a chance you can get into some trouble. I think it's maybe mostly in drier climates, but I think the jury's out on that yet. But this is rye seeded after corn harvest, and we're coming out in the spring to do soybeans. And that's looking straight down. You can see we've got enough there to make a canopy. You know, in another week or so, that'll be canopied. So we have our soil armor. Number 2 on your card is minimizing soil disturbance. We're really taking that as far as we can. We're combining passes. When we seed our corn, we're also doing our fertilizer and our seed. The only thing else we do out there is, you know, we hit it with a sprayer, and then we'll combine. But we don't do anything else out in the fields. If all we're going to do is grow a crop, I don't see any need for anything more. Seeding soybeans into some rye. We like using that rye a lot because of the soybeans. They don't mind that. It's pretty aggressive. We stopped using winter wheat because it was kind of slow to grow, not a big root system. Overwintering was, I suppose 95% have made it, but you always wondered, well, this rye seems to make it no matter what. We seed it March 1st, and it'll fill our fallow period. If we have some land that didn't get seeded in the fall, we can go out early. So this was just starting pollination. It had just rained 4 inches a couple days earlier. Over the next 7 days out there, we had another 5 inches of rain. So we're kind of stuck in that field for a while. It was kind of a good field to be stuck in, because the living roots let us drive through everything. We were able to get a good stand. There's soybeans there. It's tough to see on the screen, but you can roll the beans. They're at about the first trifoliate. This is one of my worst fields. I'll talk a little bit about it. From about the tree west, you have blow sand. There isn't any topsoil left. It's down to, I suppose you'd call it your sea horizon. It's just a sandbox. There's nothing there. And to the right is some of our Tonka clays, some Hammerly in there. It's about as close to River Valley type of clay we can get in our area. And the water table is down probably 18 inches, so it's probably pretty wet. I mean, there's more, I've grown more prevent plant out there than I have crops over the last 15 years. Until we got into this field into a full soil health type of model, we're seeing it every year now. And this planting green is really a key in your tough areas when it's too wet. We use a stripper head. We got into those in 2004. Some of our early mentors were encouraging them. I guess I can give his credit to Rick Bieber. He said that would really help me with my problems, and boy, was he right. We won't go back. That stripper head's a good thing. So here's soybeans, into August, and you can still see that stripper cut stubble has a full canopy. So where we do a stacked rotation, where we have 2 years of soybeans in a row, we can still maintain 100% residue cover when we have this soil armor. If you lose that, you start losing soil. I might as well do some tillage. That's not going to happen, so we're going to focus on our residue cover. It's plant diversity, always having live stuff out there. You can keep your bugs around. These are good ones. If you don't know, those are ladybugs. They're just hatched, and they're before they get their red spot or the red shell and black spot stage. So we're out scouting for aphids, and we're finding more and more critters. I think these are beneficial wasps that also target soybean pests. We got a daddy longleg down here. So we're using less fertilizers, less herbicides, and less insecticides. So we're pretty excited about that. So these are also in a predatory family. I forget their name, but they're pretty happy out in our fields too. I like it. The kids like it. We haven't lost any kids yet, but sometimes those crops get pretty good looking. We're all in zone 2. In a no-till system, you can terminate crops up to 7 days prior if you go by the exception number 3. Exception number 4 and number 2 gives you a little more leeway if you need it. We're not monetizing these cover crops and soil health through selling beef or milk or pork. We're putting together a livestock integration plan so we can start walking cows out there. That's one of the missing things in our system now. But the livestock we are feeding with these cover crops is their soil. I like it, kids like it. We take inventory sometimes. That living root, that's a really good thing for us. Cover crops are pretty attractive for that reason. It's clean water. Used to get stuck a lot, even getting close to those areas when we were in tillage, but the more you get a few years into this, as you can see, I'm still nervous. I went around there and I didn't even make a mark, and I thought, well, what am I turning the wheel for? I'm just, messing up my residue, right? So I couldn't go straight through the next time through, but you look at that clean water. Look at all the mud on the tires. It's 0. 0. That won't happen on a second or third time through, by the way. You heard Paul Jasa this morning talk about corn planters, I assume. We use the same type of model. We follow Exacta Solutions book. You probably all get that. We cut our residue. We also fertilize there 3 inches to the side. We spread our residue, not all of it. They don't ever touch the ground. If we touch the soil, we end up mudding everything up because we're always seeding in really muddy conditions. It's not muddy, but if you get down there and start messing with the soil, it'll stick to you. So as long as we have that residue, we're good to go. So we insert it. We do all of our firming through a Keaton with a Mojo wire. That gives us 100% of our seed firming done, so we can be confident with dual spike closing wheels. That's our one pass machine. There it is stuck. 2011, we had a lot of frost in the ground and it'd sneak up on you. But look at the mud on the tires. None. But we're stuck. There's a weight issue when the frost, those tires are riding on the frozen ground. So as it thaws out, I suppose some of you maybe found ice underneath your tires at a time or two. So in those type of conditions, we learn to respect the total weight of the machine. I just filled that drill full of fertilizer. I think it's pretty heavy. You can see we check our band fertilizer placement. But I have this on here for one reason, and that's to show you this. Look at the mud. It's nearly non-existent. The aggregation of the soil, because the glomalin that the mycorrhiza release, that's the real deal. We're just getting all this research now dumped on us about mycorrhiza and how important it is. The continual live plant root. Some of those mycorrhizas take 9 to 12 months to do a whole life cycle, and you need something living there the whole time. Plant diversity. There are 200 kinds of mycorrhiza, over 200, and there's subspecies of each kind. I don't know if they even have them all named yet. But the benefits of those are real, and we're capturing them and putting them in our soil through cover crops and diversity. And if it's too heavy, I guess we don't need it. Our neighbors in a minimum till, they have mud. That's not too far from us, or from that same field. I mean, look at the mud there. Fertility, trafficability, that's 2 inches of rain. The next morning, I'm out applying ammonium thiosulfate on the corn. I need a little sulfur that year because of ground temperatures. It was a cold spring. Look at that. Residue is gone already. It goes fast. So this is where we're putting our new cover crops. That's a band of fertilizer every 60 inches. We put it just a little bit out. We don't want to overload our soils all at once. If we need to, we can put a little bit more out, but we're really short on fertility up front, and we don't give it unless it needs it. The sprayer is a pretty quick way to get it out there. Weed control is good. We've done strip till. That's a nightmare. That was for a researcher. I told him, I'll let you do 1 or 2 passes. He didn't help me pick the rocks. We don't need deep tillage. Our neighbors do, but they also need to borrow my tractor and my chains and cables. They get stuck everywhere all the time. We have shrink swell clays on this side of the Mississippi. They fix themselves. We just have to stop causing compaction. It goes away, and it goes away really quick. This is strip till. It just uses a different width of tillage area and a different width he's leaving behind. I should have copied Jay's 5 points. I quickly put down some of my own, but they're about the same. Kids love it. I love it. He named that one Bigga. So with that, I'm glad to take questions after the break or during the break or at the end of the day. And if you're new at this, pick a mentor and ask as many questions as you can.
Okay, I'm going to give a little bit more just to stimulate your thinking, a little bit more just to get you in gear for asking questions of myself, of the 5 farmer presenters who just told about what they're doing in their own area here, of Jay, because he's the soil health specialist now for North Dakota. But again, when it comes to stimulate your thinking, I'm going to show you a little bit of data from my experiences, a little bit what I've seen in some of the work I'm doing, but it's again to fit with the 5 principles of soil health. It's not going to tell you this is what you should do, but this is what I'm seeing when I introduce the soil health principles like we just heard from these 5 farmers. And again, on my title slide here, I say residue. Residue is number 1 up there. You have to have that soil covered. Now, sometimes I pick on Jay when he says armor. His armor is already applied. I had a farmer in Nebraska, when he heard Jay, he says, oh, armor, who makes that herbicide? No, no, no. He's not applying a product. He is leaving residue there. And they thought armor was some new herbicide. It's been applied. No. Residue, it makes it work. Leave last year's residue there. If you need it for livestock feed, livestock have legs, bring them there. Leave the nutrients behind. One of the worst things you can do is haul it away. One of the worst things you do is sell it to the neighbor. What you do is, if you need some for your livestock, buy it from the neighbor because he hasn't figured this out yet. Keep the residue. I put soil biology up next. I'm going to give some examples of soil biology. I really appreciated the comments we just heard about how his residue is disappearing. It's because of soil biology. And again, when I get a call from a producer and they say, oh, I've got all these problems with the residue, I can almost guess how many years he's been in no-till. The longer they've been in, the longer they've been in continuous no-till, the longer they say, I don't have enough residue. And so again, we've got to think about that. Systems approach, I stressed it this morning, I'm going to stress it again. Think the systems approach of crop production, of soil life, of soil biology, of residue management, of everything in the system. I've not quite gotten into the complete holistic management when it comes to resources as far as the family, things like that, but you have to think that way as well, systems approach. Again, point blank, tillage has never built soil structure. Tillage always destroys soil structure. This is one of the worst cases I've ever seen. Out western Nebraska, we had a producer out there who is organic wheat production, wheat fallow. From harvest of his wheat through the 14-month fallow period, trying to store water so he can raise wheat again, he averages between 15 and 20 tillage trips a year. This is a soil pit we had dug, and the soil surface is just above the top of this. You can see some residue hanging over the hole. Look in that tillage zone. That tillage has beat out every pore, every aggregate, everything out of that soil. When I say tillage never built soil structure, yes, it has. We call that massive soil structure. That's what we don't want. What's really amazing, though, is look deeper in the profile, below tillage zone. Freeze thaw, wetting and drying, the roots that are penetrating has got some vertical structure built. I have no idea how, but it's there. Why would you come along with a racer and race that and start over every year? Let that accumulate. Earlier I said 3 to 5 years, you'll be amazed the soil behaves different. So again, that's what we need to do. What's sort of fun too is some of those plates where we ran sweeps at different levels, it must have been just wet enough the day you ran the sweep, you can pull some of those out and actually see the sweep mark on those individual plates. Like I say, that was the worst case scenario I've seen when it comes to soil biology. When it comes to soil biology, wheat fallow, here's the other half of the rotation, there's the wheat. Well, a little bit of wheat. But when it comes to soil biology, you can see he's already mined his organic matter, being an organic producer. He has really beat down soil structure, he's beat down soil biological life. And one thing I failed to do, and I should have done it, was I should have made a bigger, better footprint with my waffle print work shoes. Take a good look at that soil. How much soil life do you see compared to this one? Seriously, that's Neil Armstrong's first footstep on the moon. We know there's no life there. Does that soil look that different than that soil? We've done some dumb things with tillage. We've done some dumber things with the wheat fallow. We've got to think about what we're doing to the soil when we're out there. Build that soil, build the soil structure. And again, native in that area, we dug a soil pit in grassland, and you see some structure there. You don't see a lot of carbon there. Yeah, it is only about a 15-inch rainfall area, but there is carbon there. Now, this is overgrazed. Could have put more carbon in there. And that's one of the things we're doing with cover crops, we're doing with perennial management, we're doing with trying to get a living root growing there year-round. Now, a lot of people think about, I'm going to produce corn, soybeans, wheat, whatever. They're only actively growing out there about 5 months a year. And I say actively growing. Taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, putting it into carbon in the plants, putting it in the sugars, building the roots, everything else. Taking sunlight that's free, carbon dioxide is free, sunlight's free, the energy to do all this. Yes, I'm taking a little bit of water. We can store some water, but we can't store those other two. What Mother Nature did to build organic matter in our soils, and we heard it this morning on the prairie soil, how we started at a certain level and we've mined it down. Mother Nature put that carbon in the soil 8, 9, 10 months a year. A living root that's there probably there 12 months a year might have been dormant for a few months because of whatever we're growing. And we thought we were smarter, or our ancestor did, by growing a living root only 5 months a year. No wonder we're mining the carbon out of the soil. We're not putting it in. That's what we want to do. And that's why I like covers now when I'm doing crop production. That's why I like perennials for grazing. That's why I like looking at getting more carbon into the soil, because that carbon dioxide and sunlight is free. Why not put it back in the soil, as Mother Nature did? Why not park the tillage, build the soil structure? The one clod is fairly obvious. It's got some PEDs and aggregates there. That's about 10 years of no-till compared to walk across the fence, the conventional till neighbor. PEDs and aggregates aren't there. There aren't the pore spaces for water to soak in, for the roots to penetrate. You look at the soil, it's the same color, it's the same composition. Difference is structure again. This is no-till without covers. This producer has switched to covers. He's building things even faster yet now. So again, think about what we're doing to soil biology. I already told you about my long-term tillage plots. I talked about what I was doing as far as crop production, crop yield, but think about soil biology. It might be a little hard to see, but you can look close. The tilled side here is physically, elevation of the soil surface is about 4 inches lower than the no-till. Now that's not a steep hillside with a lot of erosion. You can hardly see where any water ran. What has happened is tillage has beat down soil structure. We've lost the pores, lost the porosity. It's a denser soil because tillage has beat it down. Since it's beat down, there's less space to store water. When a rainstorm comes, it gets wet faster because the pores fill up. They can't be drained away. When the rain quits, it dries out faster because there's less stored water. The no-till has more pores, can have a larger water cycle. It's the same amount of rain, but I can store more, I can hold more, I can let it last longer. With our long-term no-till, we have built our soils up on our research farm that when we park the tillage, start putting more carbon in the system. Our more carbon comes from increased yields. Then I'm putting out covers and even putting in more. When I started that farm in 78 to 81, we took intensive soil samples. Organic matters were 2 to 2.2, depending where you're at on the farm. Today, well, actually this last summer, I had a researcher pull a soil sample, sent it off for the area he was working in. It came back at 5.3, and he says, that's wrong. Took another sample, sent it to a different lab, came back at 5.2. Now, yes, that's 30 years later. You don't build it overnight. Well, I was in dryland production. I didn't do much to increase my carbon other than increase yields. So I put more carbon in the system. Well, about 10 years ago, I said, let's put more carbon in the system by putting covers in the system. I wish I had manure to put more carbon in the system. But again, that's what we're looking at building. But that height difference is the soil structure. When it comes to water savings, tillage, you always hear if you stir the soil, you can dry it out. That's exactly the worst thing you can do, because when you do that, you also destroy structure, destroy residue. But that drying out is only a 1/2 to 3/4 inch per trip. Maybe you're out there, we've got some conventional till farmers that do a 3-trip type system. You lose a 1/2 inch each time. Now that top layer is pretty dry. We've all seen that. To put the seed in that top layer, it doesn't grow and you're wishing for rain. Or you put on furrow openers trying to throw out the dry soil, trying to find moisture. That could be an expensive 1/2 inch. Doesn't sound like much. Worse yet, though, is evaporation. A bare soil is unprotected. The sunlight hits it, warms it up, dries it out. Norm Clocky, a researcher, used to be at Nebraska, went to K-State, did a lot of work. He sees easily 2.5 to 5 inches of difference in evaporation of cover versus no cover. Now, he's doing under irrigation. The more often the surface gets wet, the more evaporation there is. If you already got a dry soil there, residue cover versus no residue cover, the evaporation is probably the same, 0, because there's no water there. And I say that because we've got some people who are irrigators. They say, I don't need residue management for conservation of water because I got plenty of water. No, it's less water pumped because I've got residue. The infiltration, again, that's the soil structure. Let the water soak in rather than run off. It doesn't crust, it soaks in. I purposely have a question mark at 6. I've got an hour-long presentation where I talk about water management. I have a set of slides where it was 6-inch rain blew through overnight. Across the fence was long-term no-till versus conventional tillage. That 6-inch rain, the conventional tiller says, was lost. It all ran off, crusted my field. I have to replant. My terrace is overtopped. It was a worthless rain. The no-till guy, June 13th, 6-foot soil moisture pro rod, had full soil moisture profile of 6 feet, said, beautiful rain. I'm going to have a yield. Like I say, I put a question mark at 6. You don't always get that. But you know what? We're seeing a lot more of these 2, 3, 4-inch rains in a single storm. Let's soak that in rather than run it off. Total savings, 5 to 12 inches. 5's easy. But what happens? You have to intensify your cropping system to use that water. Or else what do? You complain, no-till's cold and wet. And I've seen that a lot. Guys, corn, soybean production in Illinois, Indiana, and the Corn Belt with tillage. They go to no-till. They save this water. They get too much water already, guys. And now they complain it's cold and wet. What do? They put tillage back in the system, go to strip till or something. What do? I'm raising higher yields. I'm putting cover crops in. I'm going to use the water rather than lose it. So we got to think about that. And again, here's a year, 2000. We started with a good soil moisture profile at planting time. That growing season, we got 11 inches of rain. Learned to farm like you guys do. 11 inches of rain. My tillage plots I've showed you several pictures of before, to the line, till versus no-till. We had a lot of neighbors who were combining 25 bushels beans with 11 inches of rain, and they were feeling pretty good until they heard my no-till was 47.7. Again, that's water that was soaked in, that was stored, a better, more resilient soil. And that's the word I like using as well, is making resilient systems out there. Grain sorghum that year, to the row, 61 versus 121. The drought of 2012, there's a Economic Research Service researcher from Washington, D.C., was calling around to different people around the country who were working with different tillage systems. And they says, what was your grain sorghum yield in 2012, the drought year? In our research farm, we averaged 123 that year, a drought year. Similar to this. He says, thank you. Next day he called back, he says, I just looked and the Nebraska Ag Statistics says your state average last year was 94 and that was not a drought. How do you do so much better in a drought year? I said one word, no-till. That's what it's worth for us. Corn, this is a good year. This is dryland corn, tilled was 210. So water was not an issue. No-till, 237. That's soil structure. That's healthier soil. That's a better system to raise that crop in. The interesting thing was, the reason I took the pictures to the row there, no-till stood. No-till did not. Again, when you're doing tillage, you destroy that soil structure, that root zone, all those big roots are trying to form right there, and you get those fall thunderstorms, this wet soil with wind. Our standability problems have gone away as we plant deeper and we have minimal soil disturbance. Very seldom do we have down corn. Again, another bonus, that healthier soil system, more resilient. I was on a K-State tour, saw their long-term tillage plots outside of Manhattan. And I'm up on their little tour tram, and I take this picture, and as he's talking, when he got done asking any questions, I said, why are your no-till plots 4 inches taller than your till plots? I already told you, soil structure's been beat down with tillage. He didn't see that. He says, well, I think that standing residue there is catching soil blowing off the other plots. Well, again, that should be an indication the other plots had a problem. But again, it's soil structure. Let's stop the tillage, guys. Build that soil structure up. And again, I got a lot of farmers say, well, I no-till. This is corn no-tilled into soybean residue. You can see right here where the John Deere planter went. You can see the double press wheels. And again, in Nebraska, if you ask them if they no-till, I would say about 70% of the guys planting their corn into soybean residue say they no-till. Likewise, you go to Ohio. They plant their soybeans into corn residue, no-till. About 90% of their soybeans are no-till drilled into corn residue. But the Ohio guys are afraid of the cold, wet soils, and they till the bean residue before they plant their corn. Our Nebraska guys are afraid of the corn residue, and they till the corn residue before planting their beans. No, you gotta do no-till continuous, every crop, every year. That's still a tilled soil when it comes to lack of soil biological life. It's still a tilled soil when it comes to soil structure, when it comes to the potential for crusting, because there's no residue there. Every crop, every year, do that. But again, the guys who aren't going to invest in that every crop, every year, they say, I can fix the problem, tillage. Go to Minnesota, northern Iowa, strip till, because no-till won't work. They haven't made it work. They haven't managed to make it work. And one of the first things they have to do is get covers in there or something to increase the water use, because they get too much rain anyway. These guys are in poorly drained soils with 30, 40 inches of rain. They got to do something to use that water. Full ET on corn, at least in Nebraska, is only about 20 inches. When you're in no-till system, it's about 25 in tilled system because of evaporation off the bare soil. These guys, when they're getting 30 and 40 inches of rain, yeah, it's going to be cold and wet. Grow something, use the water up. And again, Norm Clocky, I mentioned him earlier. Here's some work he's been doing down in Garden City, Kansas now. And he was looking at, during the irrigation season, he had these control areas where he could measure what was actually in the soil, the evaporation coming off. With bare soil, he measured 0.08 of inch per day evaporation. You go, that's not much. For quick math, and out west, they grow 100-day corn. 100-day corn times 0.08 is 8 inches lost to evaporation. Now, a lot of people say, well, I'm going to take the E out of ET. You can't. Anytime the surface gets wet, something's going to evaporate. Can't take it all out, but you can greatly reduce it. 25, 50, 75% cover went down to 7/100. 100% down to 5/100. Again, doesn't sound like much. Multiply across a 100-day growing season on 3 inches of water. 3 inches of water, corn responds about 12 bushels per acre inch. Who here doesn't want 36 more bushel of corn? Earlier I said 5 to 12 what no-till can save you. In Lancaster County, Nebraska, where our research farm is, if you don't have an APH when you go in for crop insurance, the T value for yield is 119 on dryline corn. Our APH is 186. That's what no-till is worth for us. We run way above county averages. And again, even 3 extra inches of water, you guys would do a lot more as well. So again, got to think about that. Residue is your friend. Leave it out there. Again, don't try to make it drier at planting time. Try to make it wetter the rest of the season. That's going to be leaving the residue out there working for you. Soil health, residue, managing it. Here's a producer who gave me a call, says, Paul, I need some help, my planter. I go, why? He says, I'm having trouble handling the bunches of residue out in the field. Got to the field, and I says, what did you do? He says, well, I was afraid of that residue, and I went last fall and rented one of these vertical tillage tools, these colders. I go, why'd you do that? He said, I wanted to cut up the residue. He cut it all loose, the wind blew. Now, it's not here in the picture, but the deepest one we found was about 12 inches deep. I don't care how you set the planter, it's pretty hard to plant through that. Remember I said this morning, residue movers to make things more uniform? We set his residue movers up about that far off the ground, pitch out the big piles. The rest of the field, some areas were wet because they had residue, some areas are dry. So much for uniformity. And he told me, he says, I'm glad I only rented that thing and didn't buy it. Don't cut residue loose. Now, I mentioned my tillage plots. They're started in 1981. Down the middle of the screen there, over on that side, has been chiseled every fall since 1981, disked every spring since 1981. This picture was taken in 2014. People say you got to do tillage to get rid of the residue. 2013, that corn yielded 146 or 47, something like that. With the tillage, fall chiseling, I'm coming out, this is the day I was going to do my disking. There's my residue. The line to this side has been no-tilled since 1981, with cover crops on it since 2007. I'm feeding the soil biology. Soil biology is such my residue is disappearing. Now you say there was no residue there. Well, that's cereal rye, just breaking dormancy there. I'm going to let it grow to grow some residue. And again, for the guys who say I have to do tillage to get rid of the residue because it won't go away, that simply tells me you got no soil biology. I got soil biology here, residue's going away, I'm feeding the soil biology to get more residue, and it's still going away. So again, residue's your friend. Let's manage it, let's manage the soil biology. I talked about planting the cover crops. Again, this is about 200 bushel corn. That's the same field, March 15th the next year with Austrian winter peas. Where did the corn residue go? Well, the reason they want to buy that vertical tillage tool, it cuts and slices the residue. I said, so does my drill. Well, the vertical tillage tool takes the residue and puts it in contact with the soil microbes. I said, so does my drill. My drill puts a seed in the ground for a living root to build soil biology. That's my vertical tillage tool right there, because it's my cover crop seeder. There's the cover crop cycling the residue. And again, I showed you this morning, talking about the drill planting residue. This is a corn, bean, wheat rotation down the center of the screen. That is simply no cover crop on that side. This side is cover crop. Again, that's cereal rye, just breaking dormancy there. I set this project up in 2005, so now this is year 12 of that project. After corn harvest, I'm doing cereal rye versus Austrian winter pea, carbon versus nitrogen. After wheat harvest, I'm doing bin run soybeans, bin run milo. Cheap seed, carbon versus nitrogen. So the base rotation is 2 carbons, 1 nitrogen, or I'm adding 2 more carbons, so it's a 4 to 1, or 2 more nitrogens where it's a 2 to 3. Now, as far as yield, not much difference. As far as soil biology, Jill Clapperton looked at the soil tests, and I did not tell her which treatment was which. On the PLFA test, she got 7 of the 9 right on the 3 ups of the 3 treatments. She could tell the difference in soil biology. Again, getting rid of corn residue. When producers say, I got too much residue, I say, plant a cover crop. They go, huh? Corn residue disappearing because the cover was there. The Austrian winter peas. After the wheat harvest, bin run beans, bin run milo. And people say, well, the cover crops cost too much money for all that seed. Grain sorghum sells for about $3 to $5 a bushel, depending upon the year. It's seeded at 5 to 10 pounds per acre. That milo cover crop seed is 35 cents an acre. You can't tell me cover crops are too expensive. You know what I love about bin run milo and bin run beans? It gets rid of leftover seed for me, but you can find bin run usually pretty cheap. So what if germination's not real high? It's a cover. I love it because it frosts off. When I plant my corn the next year, I don't have to put a burn down on it. It's already there. But I got carbon. I've got nitrogen. What's it worth? I say it started in 2005, 2008, wheat stubble by itself, 166. With the milo, extra carbon, 175. With the soybeans, some little extra nitrogen, 179. Out of the 11 years of data I already have, there were 3 years in there that made more than enough money to pay for all the covers across the 11 years in all 3 crops of the rotation. You don't need a home run every year. You need to feed the soil biology every year. And I say that because what happened in the drought year? 76, 76, 74. Drought year, 2012. Didn't hurt me. Everyone says the covers are going to hurt you in a drought year. The year after the drought, a little extra residue there. It actually, a couple bushels, not bad. 2016, I saw something different. To the line. This is no cover. That side is green sorghum. 35 cents worth of seed. Frosted off. Which one had volunteer wheat? I'll give you time to think about it. I saved a herbicide application. If the entire field would have had grain sorghum after wheat harvest, I would have had no volunteer wheat. Again, Mother Nature's an opportunist. You got nothing growing there, Mother Nature will put something there. Volunteer wheat we've eliminated by using covers in our wheat stubble. Now, end of May, time to do post-emerge. To the line, which one needed post-emerge? That volunteer wheat was gone because we burned it down at planting time. We put down a residual herbicide. The residual herbicide with the grain sorghum residue held. Without cover, wheat stubble's there, but you know what? It didn't hold the weeds down. We could have saved it post-emerge. And I say that because too many people say, well, what's your yield next year? I'm like, I'm looking at total system. I just saved 2 herbicide applications. I put more carbon in the system. It may or may not show up as yield, but it shows up as profitability. Now, what was interesting here is ears are forming pretty well. There's the grain sorghum, still no weeds. Corn looks a little nitrogen deficient, doesn't it? The high carbon cover crop. I tell producers, make sure you got at least 30 to 50 extra pounds of starter nitrogen to make sure that corn crop never gets behind. You may or may not need extra nitrogen total, but you definitely need it early because some of that nitrogen is tied up. Well, I put down 170 pounds of N, raised 179 bushel of corn there. Anytime you're in wheat stubble with high carbon cover crop and you're doing better than a pound or a bushel per pound, my agronomy friend says you can't do any better than that. Where there was no cover crop, a lot of weeds in there now. That's after post-emerge. Corn looks a little greener. It did 200. 170 pounds, and with all the rain we had this year was not enough for 200 bushel corn. Is that a cover crop problem? No, that's a systems approach, nitrogen management, looking at the system. For 170 pounds applied on wheat stubble for 170 bushel yield goal, and I made 178, I'd say no problem. For a 200 bushel yield goal, it was a problem. Again, there's 2016, the 178 versus, well, the 200 was actually the nitrogen cover crop, the soybeans, 195 with no cover. Look at 215 though. That was with the same 170 pounds of N. Again, there was 1 year there that paid for all the other 11. Soil life, soil biology. I like the mixes in my wheat stubble. That's where I put a lot on. I throw in this. We grow seed wheat. You leave that first half pass because the seed processor doesn't want brome grass or whatever's on the edge of the pass. We seeded the cover on the rest of the field the day the combine was in the field. The last half pass didn't get taken off until a week later. Now, in that last half pass, half of it was combined a week before, half of it was combined the day I seeded the cover. Doesn't sound like much difference to seed the cover a week later. Here is standing there. That's the outside pass. It's seeded a week later than the inside pass. That outside pass is 11 weeks of growth. The inside pass is 12 weeks of growth. You're a livestock man. Which one would you rather turn the livestock in? Delaying 1 week on seeding, look how much growth I gave up. See the grain bins there. We got a taller bin on the other side of the Quonset. I was on this taller bin, looked out, saw this, and there it is, the outside pass again. Gave up all that growth. What I saw was interesting though. I walked out there. The first half pass from the edge of the field, there were very few weeds. Remember that was seeded the day it was combined. The next half pass grew 1 week with no cover. Look how many weeds are there. The rest of the field had next to no weeds because that was seeded the day the combine left the field. I seed the cover the day the combine leaves the field, or else Mother Nature seeds it for me. Here's what it looks like the next spring. All that cover goes down, I plant right through it, a little weight on the planter, go. I got a lot of carbon there, I got my wheat stubble still there. We get more wheat stubble out there because we've got the residue out there. Again, keeps the soil temperature down. Here's my tillage plots, tilled versus no-till. 35 bushel difference because of soil temperature. Here I got to show you the last thing, soil temperature. This is a guy I visited in Australia. He was proud of the fact he had been no-tilling for 14 years. He uses a shank opener and he harvests his straw off. There's nothing there to protect the soil. That soil gets hot. They had 120-degree air temperatures, 160-degree soil temperatures for 2 weeks before I got there. Throw a steak in the grill. You cook it to 130 for 7 minutes to make it safe to eat. You know what 160 does for 2 weeks? Soil life's gone. His stubble's the short stuff. The tall stubble next to it is from the neighbor. Neighbor used stripper header. No living root there. The difference is simply temperature. Again, which one had soil biology that ate up the roots? They're both no-tillers, both for 14 years. Just because you're a no-tiller, just because you have residue doesn't mean you have soil biology. With that, you say the Australians, it was fun. This is the one that's going to shake you guys up. I have too many farmers say, I don't have enough rainfall to do the covers. This is emus there. The farmer I was visiting when we took this picture, he had cover, no cover. Drug my foot across there. Where's the moisture at? It was just that quick. Here's what his cover looked like, and I showed you what mine looks like. I almost felt sorry for him. He looked at this and says, see, that cover crop is the greatest thing I've invented. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, that doubles my wheat yield. I looked at him and said, seriously? He's in an area that only gets 12 inches of rainfall, and that doubles his wheat yield. Where there was no cover, there was no soil moisture. The temperatures of the soil were hot. Soil biology died. Where there was the cover, there was that much soil moisture, there was a living root, there was soil biology. The soil biology and the living root doubles his wheat yield, even though that's all the cover he grew. Keep a living root in the soil. Underline that one. With that, living root, prevented planting, flooded soils, get a living root out there. Missouri River bottom 2011, it was not pretty. Here's a producer, no cover, irrigated corn, 210. 75 pounds of oats seeded in February, 241. The same year, oats peas, 244. Living root brought that soil back to life. With that, Jay's ready to pull me off because we want farmers up here.
Let's get Paul.
Oh, this will work. This will work. And again, to get on the tape, you got to stand here.
Yeah, we're going to ask farmers if they would mind coming up to the farmer panel, and we'll have a little Q&A. So if I can have a few chairs here, the gentleman would.
And as you guys ask questions, the farmers up here, please stand in front of the microphone and repeat the question before you answer it, such that it shows up nice in our video back there. If you're standing over there talking over the microphone, they will hear it out here, but the video will not.
Before the ice cream social, we're just going to take a few minutes, give you a chance to ask some questions. I hope you agree that everyone here did a really nice job today. It was just excellent. And if you ask somebody a question, we're just going to ask them to go to the podium to answer it because the video is hooked into that mic. So if we could go in that manner. And so if anyone has a question, I'll just hand you the mic.
if you, if somebody growing, using anhydrous that grows wheat came to you and asked you a question, how would I make a change from going to using anhydrous ammonia to urea? How would you address that farmer? I think a lot of farmers are really questionable how to make that change if they want to change, but I think it's an important change that we have that type of change.
We made that change in our farm. One of the things that we did, we just went to urea, but we would band it on top of the ground. With a lot of residue, banding it on top of the ground was kind of a helping way to not lose as much to the atmosphere. And in conditions when we would lose, where we should have lost the atmosphere, we didn't. And I don't understand why. Maybe the residue caught it. But what I would do today different would be I would use a little bit of urea spread evenly on the ground, and some AMS, get some sulfur out there to help it. But not all what you need. There should be a lot in the soil. You're gonna need a little bit in the spring, but be ready with a liquid application on your sprayer, like a side dress. We're pretty adamant about splitting our N applications, not because it's a cool kid thing to do, but because if we're not in a situation where we're gonna yield, remember we're in North Dakota, if we're not gonna yield, we don't want the inputs out there. Since we've been into the soil health and cover crop model of farming, we're yielding every year. So we end up applying a little bit more every year. But what we notice is when we put it all out at once, we burn through our organic matter level, we burn through our residue. It's too much at once. We're overloading the system. We get a big flush of biology that, you know, it unbalances the system. So having it spread out through the year, I think, is a better deal. So if you want to switch from anhydrous in the fall to some spring, you know, we're gonna spread it out a little bit with some sulfur. And then anytime we're using nitrogen, we're also using a little bit of sulfur. So, thank you.
Next question. Yes.
I just had a question about soil temperature. I have some neighbors who will do some fall tillage or even spring tillage so as to get soil temperature warmer so they can see the soybeans quicker. How does that affect soil temperature?
Question on soil temperature and tillage. Tillage does make the soil blacker. When the sun's out and shining, and it does absorb more heat. You measure it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it will be warmer. For those, I grew up with a dirt bike. It had black cooling fins on the engine. The black radiates heat back out. Go out at 6 o'clock in the morning and measure soil temperature, that tilled soil versus residue covered, it will be colder because it radiates heat out because there's no residue there to hold the temperature. I find corn is really sensitive, soybeans not as much. Corn in that nighttime dip in temperature is actually harder on the plant than the lack of the daytime heat. When I say we can plant our corn sooner than our tilled neighbors, it's because we don't have the nighttime dips in temperature. Now, as far as the soybeans, we can plant those earlier as well. It's because of the soil structure, we got heat rising from below. There's an excellent study done in France that I saw a publication on. They measured soil temperature in March. In no-till, it was 8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than tilled in March because the heat rising from below. There was still snow on the ground everywhere. On the tilled, on the no-till, it was already melted away because of the temperature difference. Soils are warmer if you have the structure and the biological activity. You got to be here to get to the video.
Okay, I'd just like to add to that. Just since the first of the year in the Farm and Ranch Guide, they had a chart on some research that was done on that very issue. And it was interesting, you know, everybody says you need to work the ground to make it warm up. And when they measured no-till to that and to strip-till, the tilled ground, yes, it warmed up quicker on the surface, but it dried out all the moisture, and the moisture is what transfers the heat. So the deeper temperature at probably 6 inches to a foot below the surface was actually colder under the tilled ground than it was under the the ground that was covered. Now, granted, the surface wasn't as warm, but the deep temperature was warmer than the ground that had been tilled. And the same followed through over to the strip till. They had hot, cold going across their fields. So the argument doesn't hold water that you have to work the ground to warm it up.
Next question. I know you're thinking ice cream. Yes.
This is spring overall in my 750 drill, and that all you used a lot of different closing wheels, and I would like your opinion on what style, or a pointy one or a square one.
You guys run 750 or an 1880, whatever.
When I was contemplating going to no-till, I bought one Thompson wheel, and they're very thin, and I was doing conventional till, and I put the drill into some no-till conditions and walked back, and I could see the wheat in my furrow on the John Deere closers, and the Thompson wheel had filled it in and handled the mud and handled conventional tillage too just fine, and I've done my whole drill, and it's been 2 years. And the one thing, the Thompson wheel is light, so the spring will hold the Thompson wheel from bouncing. So if you go, they say you can't seed too fast with a 1890, but I seed pretty fast.
Here's Mike. That's for the wheel on the back. The seed press wheel itself, John Deere's original one was over 1.25 inches wide because it was designed in tilled soils. Everyone was taking that off and putting on the Case IH one, which was 3/4 inch wide. Deere got tired of them buying the red wheel to put on their drill. They made a narrower one. They went down to 3/4 inch as well. 3/4 inch gives you a better seed to soil contact down in that V. It does not ride out on the sides like you do need for tilled soil. But look at the Needham wheel, the wheel now that Exact is selling, they're only about 1/2 inch wide. Get more pressure right on the seed for good seed to soil contact, and then do something else to crumble it in. Needham likes the 20-point crumbler from Martin. Exact likes the Thompson T wheel, you just heard.
Any other questions? Glenn? Just.
Toss it
Yeah,
where it
what
catches
I'm
it.
wondering about is, could you compare a seed firming wheel with a seed firmer with
Question here is on comparing a seed firming wheel to a seed firmer. When it comes to planters, there is no seed firming wheel on the market anymore. It used to be the J&S Soil Enforcer and used to be the Yetter wheel. Both of them were taken off the market because they didn't work. They didn't work because they're too small a diameter. And as that small diameter wheel came off of the seed, it was immediately picking the seed up and kicking out of the seed V. Now, Buffalo used to have their 1x10 wheel. John Deere had a small wheel. You guys probably didn't even know John Deere had it. They had it for 2 years, and they decided they could not teach people how to operate it. They decided to quit offering it. Kinsey had a larger wheel. The larger diameter wheels work because they press on the seed. Now the seed firmers, I showed the fin on a 750. It drags on the seed, presses the seed in. If you got a good seed V and enough pressure on there to keep that seed firmer clean, they work pretty good. That's why the Mojo wire is invented for the Keaton seed firmer, to keep enough pressure on it to keep it clean. If it's a little limp and dragging, you got some loose soil in the seed V, and the soil is a wet, sticky clay, it builds up, creates problems. And so most producers I've seen stick with the wheels on the John Deere type seeders, the Case IH wheels. That's what they use as standard equipment. The fin has the option of a fertilizer tube down the middle of it. That's an advantage to some people.
Okay, we have a question right here.
Any of you guys do the wide drop fertilizer in your corn application? You were talking about nitrogen, and I don't know if you.
Question on why drop of the fertilizer. They all shook their head no, just for the sake of the video. Are you talking about the why not splitter on the, like on the Keaton seed firmer?
No, wide drop on the sprayer?
Oh, on the sprayer. I see it a lot more on streaming on fertilizer for nitrogen on wheat. And as he said, to keep the fertilizer in a concentrated band, not to touch as much soil surface, you minimize losses, you minimize tie-up. And that's where streaming becomes an advantage. On our wheat, we fertilize it with dry urea. It used to be ammonium nitrate, but our local quit carrying it. We put it on, actually about 2 weeks ago this year, before the wheat breaks dormancy. Put down a base rate. Then, like you said, wait and see what the wheat's going to do. When you're doing a herbicide application, or later, we put down more nitrogen if we need it. We play at that base rate depending on what's the relative price between liquid and dry, because that dry is cheap, quick spread. The liquid can be a herbicide carrier, or we put streamers on and just stream it on if we don't need the herbicide. But again, there's where we have the streaming at least to minimize tie-up of the nitrogen. It depends too if you get a protein bonus on your wheat. You get a real good growing condition year, you don't have enough nitrogen down, you're going to be deficient on protein, you're going to get docked in the upper end. That's where that side dress pays.
Any other questions?
You were just talking about closing wheels for like the 1890, 1895, and the dimple versus the cast iron that comes with the machine. What's the problem with it when it still leaves that trench open? Is it the soil, or is it there's something wrong with the drill setup?
Both. Problem on, you may or may not be completely closing the seed V, and depends upon what closer you got behind. One of the things is when the drills themselves, those 1890s, 750s even, on a swing arm. Anytime the arm starts coming up uneven, you lose some closing pressure. So it could be set up on the machine, you don't have the rock shaft rotated far enough to keep enough pressure on that closing wheel. Now, assuming you got it rotated properly, we got some operators now say you actually over-rotate the shaft, 5 to 7 degrees. I don't know about that. I usually like to run it proper rotation, proper angle to get all the geometry to work out. But again, when it comes to what's going on in the soil, it could be a soil structure or lack of soil structure difference too. A wet clay soil with no soil structure, you're more likely to leave a rib in there and leave the seed V open. One with good PEDs and aggregation, it's more likely to crumble and close. Well, that's one reason the guys like those crumblers. The 20-point crumbler is Martin's name, the Thompson T wheel as exact as his name, but just to create that loose soil so it does close and stay closed.
Last question.
So I'm just curious, are you able to reduce the amount of nitrogen required for wheat crop? So much.
I defer to the locals on the question on how much can you reduce your nitrogen, because your nutrient cycling here is completely different than mine.
Well, the answer is yes. But if you starve your soil, the plants are going to get it from the soil. So if you build your soil system, if you're into a soil health model and you've got a lot happening in your soil, the soil's come alive, you've got a lot of biology, you might have 2,000 or 3,000 pounds of nitrogen circulating in that soil. When do you need to put your 50 down or your 100 pounds down? You know, ask yourself that question. That'll kind of make you think a little bit. Now, do I need 10 pounds at this time? Do I need 30 pounds at this time to trigger something to happen? Rather than giving it 100 and hoping it happens when I go to harvest it later. So that's how we're doing it with less. We know we need it at this time, so we're holding it back. We don't want to mess up our system. There's so much in the system already, but we're not worried about our corn. We're feeding our soil, because our soil can feed the corn can feed us, allowing us to return to the soil and feed that. So we've taken our focus off our fertility program and put it on getting carbon and increasing the size of that system.
Okay, I've reserved the last question, and I think the last question goes to livestock integration, so the question becomes for Aaron and Travis. If I can hear from each of you regarding how do your livestock respond when they come into the cover crops? Do you notice something in terms of body condition? Do you notice anything in terms of just their demeanor? I'm curious how the animals acclimate to the covers.
I guess for us, the first couple of years, it was a learning curve. It took the first half of the winter to get our cows used to eating turnips and radishes, for one. Once the cows got onto them, condition-wise, we had very good luck. We had a few dairy cross cows. They're a little harder maintaining cows that didn't work quite as well. But those problems kind of cleaned themselves up in time. It actually, if a good cover crop is growing good, our cows condition back really quick on cover crops. I mean, depending on the protein levels and what's available. But we've gone through this, feeding less to our cows with the cover crops. I mean, feeding less out of our pockets or the hay yard. And we've actually maintained our breeding levels too. This last year we dropped our open rate by another 0.5%. So I mean, that all ties directly back to cow condition, I guess. So I mean, we're not hurting ourselves by any means by doing this, and cutting our hay needs too, so that's helping.
I guess Travis covered it pretty well, but just to kind of reiterate what he said, when we first started with the cover crops and grazing them, it did take a little bit of time for them to become acclimated to it and get used to it. But once they discovered how much they liked it, you know, they really took to the cover crops well, and they put on condition, and it kind of gets to the point where you have to police them quite a bit so you don't end up overgrazing those cover crops, because I think there's been situations where we've done probably more damage to our soil health program than good with overgrazing them as well. So they do well on them, but you also have to make sure you're policing them and make sure you don't overdo it. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, with that, we're going to conclude with our program. Again, I want to thank the Morton SCD Soil District and the Burley Soil District. Some help from NRCS grant. Appreciate Hagee Manufacturing being here as well. And the farmer panel, really appreciate you guys. They were excellent. Paul, you did okay, you know, but I think we should give everyone a real big hand. They did an excellent job. Thank you. Cindy, I think we're ready for some ice cream. Okay, let's have a bit of an ice cream social. Thank you.